The Invisible Man. In the heart of Victorian London, where the fog rolled in thick from the Thames and the gas lamps cast a dim glow on the cobblestone streets, there lived a man whose name was whispered in both fear and fascination, Dr. Alexander Hawthorne. A brilliant scientist and inventor, Dr. Hawthorne had dedicated his life to unlocking the mysteries of the natural world. But his greatest discovery, the one that would seal his fate, was the secret of invisibility. Dr. Hawthorne's experiments were conducted in a sprawling laboratory hidden beneath his grand townhouse on Kensington Street. The walls of his lab were lined with shelves cluttered with beakers, flasks, and strange contraptions, all part of his quest to bend light itself. After years of tireless research, he had finally succeeded. One fateful night, with trembling hands and a heart pounding with anticipation, he drank the elixir that would render him invisible. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. His reflection in the mirror vanished, leaving behind only the empty room. He looked down at his hands and saw nothing but the floor beneath them. Dr. Hawthorne was invisible, his body now a ghostly presence that moved unseen through the world. At first, the power of invisibility was intoxicating. Dr. Hawthorne roamed the streets of London, delighting in his newfound freedom. He slipped past guards into the British Museum, wandered unseen through the halls of the Royal Academy of Sciences, and even stood in the shadows of Buckingham Palace. He could go anywhere, see anything, and no one would ever know. But the thrill of invisibility soon gave way to a darker reality. Dr. Hawthorne found himself cut off from the world, a phantom unable to interact with those around him. His friends and colleagues began to worry about his sudden disappearance, but they had no way of knowing that he was right there among them, unseen and unheard. Loneliness gnawed at him, and the isolation became unbearable. He tried to communicate by writing notes, but without a visible presence, his messages were met with fear and confusion. The world he had once been a part of now seemed distant and alien, a place where he no longer belonged. Desperate to reverse the effects of his experiment, Dr. Hawthorne returned to his laboratory and threw himself into his work. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as he sought a way to reclaim his physical form. But the elixir that had granted him invisibility proved impossible to undo. The more he tried, the more he realized that he was trapped in his invisible state. One rainy evening, as the gas lamps flickered in the damp air, Dr. Hawthorne wandered through the deserted streets, lost in thought. He passed a small, dimly lit bookstore and stopped in his tracks. Through the window, he saw a young woman sitting behind the counter, her face illuminated by the warm glow of a candle. She was reading a book, her expression one of quiet contentment. Drawn by an inexplicable longing, Dr. Hawthorne entered the bookstore. The bell above the door rang, but the woman didn't look up. He stood there, watching her, feeling an overwhelming sense of connection. For the first time in months, he felt seen, even though he knew she couldn't see him. He began to visit the bookstore every evening, watching the woman as she read and attended to customers. Her name was Emily, and she was kind and gentle, with a love for books that mirrored his own passion for science. Dr. Hawthorne found solace in her presence, even if she never knew he was there. One night, Emily stayed late, reading by the light of the candle as the rain pattered against the windows. Dr. Hawthorne stood in the shadows, closer than he had ever dared before. He noticed a notebook on the counter, filled with Emily's neat handwriting. Curiosity got the better of him, and he leaned over to read her words. As he read, he realized that Emily was writing about her dreams and fears, her hopes and sorrows. She wrote about feeling invisible in a world that didn't seem to notice her, about the loneliness that sometimes crept into her heart. Dr. Hawthorne felt a profound connection to her words, understanding her pain in a way that no one else could. Moved by her vulnerability, he decided to take a risk. He picked up a pen and wrote in the margin of her notebook, "You are not invisible. I see you." Emily gasped and looked around, but there was no one there. Her eyes fell on the words, and she read them again, her brow furrowing in confusion. She picked up the pen and wrote beneath his message, "Who are you?" Dr. Hawthorne's heart raced. He wrote back, "A friend. Someone who understands." And so began a strange and beautiful correspondence between the invisible man and the woman who felt unseen. Each night, They exchanged messages in the notebook, sharing their thoughts and fears, their dreams and desires. Through their words, they formed a bond that transcended the barriers of visibility. Emily began to look forward to the mysterious notes, finding comfort in the presence of her unseen friend. She shared her love of literature, her favorite poems, and stories from her childhood. Dr. Hawthorne, in turn, shared his knowledge of science and his own journey of invisibility. One night, as Emily closed the bookstore, she left a note for her invisible friend: "Meet me at the park tomorrow at noon. I want to hear your voice." Dr. Hawthorne was filled with a mixture of excitement and dread. He had grown to care deeply for Emily, but he feared her reaction if she discovered the truth. Nevertheless, he couldn't bear to disappoint her. The next day, he went to the park and waited beneath the old oak tree. Emily arrived, her eyes scanning the park for any sign of her friend. "Are you here?" she called softly. "I am," Dr. Hawthorne replied, his voice trembling. "But you cannot see me." Emily's eyes widened. "You're real. You're really here." "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "I'm Dr. Alexander Hawthorne, and I made a terrible mistake. I became invisible, and now I can't change back." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "You're not invisible to me, Alexander. I've seen you in your words, in your kindness. You are not alone." In that moment, Dr. Hawthorne felt a warmth spread through him, a light that seemed to pierce the darkness of his isolation. He reached out, and though she couldn't see him, Emily took his hand. They stood there, two souls connected by an invisible bond, finding solace in each other's presence. Though Dr. Hawthorne remained unseen, he was no longer alone. With Emily by his side, he found a new sense of purpose and hope. Together, they faced the challenges of their world, proving that even in the face of the impossible, love and understanding could make the invisible visible.